Bob, if we go exec session, is there stuff to talk about on some of the, or
I don't have any reports yet.
Hi, this is BJ. Can I help you?
I do anticipate this week here. Okay, they're not quite finished.
Bob, you know what's going on with Warwick Terrace? There's like one area that keeps slipping. Rusty and then worked on it months ago.
There's a spring there, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I know it's a wet spot, so I haven't looked at it myself. I know we had a game plan to fix it once things got back to normal. But yeah, it is. I know exactly
We still have a lot. They cleaned them and then it was just too moist or something in the structure section.
I think it's still.
Once BJ's off the phone, are you guys ready to start the finance meeting?
When you get to speak, but I'll give you a call right back after we get this finance committee started and give you the login information. Okay, you're welcome. And bye-bye. Steve Rawson is good. Just signed up to speak. Just FYI.
Did he tell you about what?
I'm going to go live on Facebook and we can get started.
What he wants to speak about?
I don't know. Can everybody hit their mute buttons? Because the paper shuffling and background noise is a little tricky.
Sorry, Mom.
Whatever.
All right, if we're all ready, I'll call the finance meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the financial statement for March of 2020. Mr. Herring.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, this financial statement does not reflect what's going on from the COVID-19 situation that we're currently in. So I'll briefly go through it. It does look pretty good, actually, in that we finished the quarter with a general fund cash balance of $2,263,000 with $1,313,000 in the budget stabilization fund. That's approximately $310,000 more than this time last year. So that's a positive. From an expenditure perspective, year to date, we're 75% through the year, and we're at our budget from budgeted expenditure perspective, we're at 69%. So we're a little bit ahead from an expenditure perspective. Revenue-wise, like I mentioned, we're about $300,000 ahead of the same time last year. We're 76% of revenue, a budget on revenue, and 75% through the year. So all in all, through the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, we're a little bit ahead of where we were at the same time last year, a little bit better position than last year. That's the financial report for the month of March.
Is there anything particular you would attribute that to? Is that construction highway or?
Well, yeah, the being a
You guys, could you guys speak up a little bit? We're having trouble. I'm having trouble hearing Bob and Jen.
turn all the way up.
As we've talked about, property tax revenue is up by about 300,000. B&O tax is up by 25, 30,000. And I'll talk a little bit about the COVID-19 because some of the impact of COVID-19, it does show up in this financial report because it did begin in mid-March. The sales tax, it's not reflective in this report, but in this report, the sales tax revenue is $77,000 ahead of the same time last year. And then we've received our fourth quarter sales tax revenue in April, which is the remaining portion of the fiscal year. And we ended up at $11,000 ahead of budget for sales tax, which is not reflected in this report. But for this report, sales tax is $77,000 ahead of the same time last year. And then the other big item is ambulance fees. A couple of years ago, we changed the collection company on the ambulance fees. We stayed current with allowable fees associated with Medicare and Medicaid, and that's about $183,000 ahead of the same time last year. And then we're having a very good year from a billing permit perspective. We're $54,000 ahead of the same time last year with billing permits. We're down on parking revenue because of the fact that the Center Wheeling parking structure basically is vacant from an OVMC closure perspective. From COVID-19, I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second, but we've seen immediate reductions in revenue in certain categories. For example, bed tax, revenue from the casino, parking meter revenue are examples of revenue that basically has stopped as a result of COVID-19. So all in all, there's some negatives, but thus far through the end of March, the positive outweigh the negatives. Again, it doesn't reflect what's going on from a COVID-19 perspective.
Any questions or comments?
Yes, some of the things you identified, like the video lottery, table gaming, the racetrack, the video lottery limited, and a few other things that I don't see that we're going to get for the month of April that I could identify, like the parking meter revenues. I think it totals about $152,000 there. Should we be able to handle that $152,000 difference going into April, not having that?
Well, yes, because we finished from the cash balance perspective, we finished ahead of budget by almost $300,000. But the finance director and I, as I mentioned at the last council meeting, we've been kind of working on revenue projections because that's the most immediate impact that we really can't control. Expenditures we can. And to speak to Councilman Palmer's comment regarding those types of revenues, we've identified what we're calling tier 1 revenues, which are revenues that are immediately impacted by the shutdown associated with COVID-19. And there's a long list of those, but for example, amusement tax, people aren't buying tickets to the West Bank Arena, the Capitol Theater, shows at the casino, all revenue associated with the casino, which has stopped immediately as a result of their closure. Parking violations and parking meter revenues, because we are not currently issuing parking tickets or we are collecting what little bit of parking meter revenue there is. The recreation funds, which are not significant, but for example, immediate stoppage of revenue for softball, basketball, baseball camps, soccer, cheerleading, bowling, I-470 concessions. As I mentioned, the parking meter revenues. Center Market rents are down based on businesses closing there. We don't have police officers in the schools, so we're still paying police officers, but we're not receiving the PRO revenue as a result of them not being in the schools. Of course, the gaming revenue from the track or from the casino, table gaming, the video lottery from the casino, all those are revenues that we are indicating we're not anticipating revenue.
One other thing that stuck out with me was the vacant building registration fee. It's down about $33,000. I had asked Mrs. Prager on that, and seems to be a few outstanding violators that we have no way to collect without the municipal court system. So I think it's something that we have to be very careful and watch going forward, that we can try to collect these major violators. If Bob was talking, I could not hear him.
Yeah, something happened with their sound. It cut out.
I'm sorry. That was my fault.
At any rate, with municipal court, we are formulating a game plan that once they're able to begin meeting again, that there will be, there's a potential for multiple days during the week, but we are going to extend municipal court hours into the evening to catch up with the backlog, which not only pertains to the vacant building registration, code enforcement, but also obviously the work the police department is doing with tickets.
Thank you.
At any rate, back to the COVID-19 discussion. We've identified the immediate impact of revenues from the various shutdowns, and then we've also looked at what we would consider to be what we're calling Tier 2 revenues, which are B&O, utility business taxes, wine and liquor taxes, which will phase in over the next 9 months. But at any rate, we're looking at worst case scenario, or excuse me, best case scenario, at an 8% reduction we would see in the reduction of revenue in the third or fourth quarter on the tier one revenues that I mentioned, which are immediate. At 8% would be $678,000 for the tier 2 revenues, which are B&O, which will lag behind because there is obviously still business going on, et cetera, at $437,000. And then the remaining revenues, which are property taxes, building permits, fire service fees, et cetera, at about a 2.7% reduction, which is $234,000. So all that added up, the potential for and this is an estimate, and obviously it'll play itself out, could be a reduction of about $1.3 million less revenue in the fourth quarter of this current fiscal year.
Any other questions or comments? If there's nothing else, I'll need a motion to accept the
No,
financial
I have a
statement.
question. Yeah, if there's a lag time, sorry. So in regards to that potential 1.3 million, Mr. Herron, how do we potentially absorb that?
Well, typically, the city ends its budget year at between 96 and 98% of budget. So even if it ends up at 98%, which we feel it will be the case, that will be about $600,000 of the 1.3 million. And in which case, after that, we would have to look at our budget stabilization fund, which was originally set up as a rainy day fund for any shortfall in revenue. Right now, that budget stabilization fund and the sales tax revenue that we have available is about $2 million.
It's about 2 million, or
Yeah, just a little over $2 million.
I'm sorry, over or under? I couldn't hear.
Slightly over $2 million.
Slightly over. Okay. Thank you. And so is that is utilizing that fund? Well, this isn't comfortable for anybody for anything, so I don't know the right word, but is utilizing that fund to make up the difference our best course?
Well, is it our best course? Right. I mean, it's set up as a rainy day fund.
Right.
I mean, certainly we could make drastic cuts now. I don't know that it would have a dramatic impact between now and the end of the fiscal year. But that's what those funds are set up for. Unfortunately, we've never had to use them for that purpose. I will say that, because that fund did start out at $1 million when it was first established. Now the rainy day fund is up to 1.8, plus we've got some sales tax revenue of 200,000 to make the $2 million. But that is, that is a readily available source of funding for the anticipated shortfall as a result of what's going on with this pandemic.
Okay, but I'm just trying to understand the options, so that we could kind of have a, an overall idea of all things.
And then in addition to that, we do have what we call our project fund, which is a combination of gas and oil revenue that we've received, as well as the $1.5 million from the sale of the parking structure in Center Wheeling. There are some encumbrances against that, but that's an additional $3 million that is unencumbered. That would be a kind of a second tier of revenue if needed.
I would just add to that efforts are, the federal legislation that passed in March, the CARES Act, and I know there's a talk of another stimulus bill in Congress right now as well, but the CARES Act did allocate money. I think the governor of West Virginia got, $1.25 billion. That money is ultimately, some of it's supposed to be going directly to cities throughout the state, but the terms and the standards for that are still kind of being discussed. But there is some federal assistance we could be getting through the governor's office at some point as well. We'll know more hopefully within the next month or so, but that is also out there as a potential revenue source.
Do we have clarity about exactly what the items are that the city would be eligible for and how we get that eligibility? Because I see a lot of conflicting information and different headlines about there's only certain things you can use it for and all kind of
Understanding is, and this is what I'm hearing both directly from the West Virginia Municipal League as well as from Matt Ward, who's assisting us in various grant writing things, is the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury was supposed to issue some clarifications on the legislation. I thought it was supposed to come out by the end of last week, but I don't believe it's come out. It's not come out as of today, because we need those clarifications, because I think the governor's office right now is a little bit unsure exactly how that money can be spent based on the language of the statute. So we need that clarification.
There are other pools of money too that are available to us already. And for example, $690,000 of community development block grant funds have been allocated to the city of Wheeling towards COVID-19 expenses. There's no clarification from HUD as to what is an eligible expense for that funding yet. We are anticipating that within the next 2 weeks, but we know the amount, but we don't know what we can spend it on.
Also,
and that's over and above our regular CDBG.
That's correct, yes.
and also I believe city manager, the National League of Cities and the International Municipal Attorneys Association are lobbying on our behalf, along with West Virginia Municipal League, in regard to getting more local funding, local grants for the federal monetary package.
If there's nothing else, I'll need a motion to accept the financial statement and forward it to council.
I have one other question. Mr. Herron, in terms of your projections and sort of time frame, have you and Mr. McIntyre kind of been able to project this? If certain things happen now, it's one set of circumstances and financial outlook versus 6 months from now or, into December. I'm just wondering what kind of variables you and Mr. McIntyre have looked at in terms of the projections.
Yeah, what we're focused in on are, like I mentioned, the tiered revenues, but then we're also looking at percentages as to what historically will occur over this quarter. We don't know. We're guessing. But that historic data will become available, and then we will apply those percentages as we feel comfortable in them to the next fiscal year and revenues associated with it. Right now, the revenue or the ranges that we're looking at are anywhere from 15 to 29% overall. And that hopefully those numbers are high, But whatever those end up being, we will apply those going forward.
And is that bigger projection, which is a conservative one, but that's okay. Is that in your mind, like on the calendar going all the way to December, or is that like, where does that kind of match up with timing wise? I don't know if that's an answerable question. I'm just trying to understand.
Well, it is and it isn't. What we're hoping is it is December, but what we're planning for is 9 months into the fiscal year before we get back on our footing. So that's an excellent question. Hopefully it is 6 months, but I think it's going to end up being 9.
Okay, that's what I wanted to kind of gauge, is just what ballpark are we living in, as much as we don't know.
It'll take several months to ramp up, and like I said, we're looking at 9 months into the next.
Okay. All right. I thank you for the information very much. Now
I'll make a motion to accept the
Todd.
financial report.
I second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. That brings us to item B. Other items for discussion, Mr. Herron?
I have none.
Members of the committee have anything else to discuss?
I had asked about just an estimate on if we got into the conversation about hazard pay, and I didn't know if you and Mr. McIntyre had a chance to project any of that kind of around that conversation.
We have not yet, but the two chiefs are working on that right now.
If there's nothing else, I'll need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah. Sorry, my computer blanked out. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? All right, finance meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.